Hi there, and welcome. It's Spiritual Psychic Cynthia Killian here, also known as Psychic Cynthia. And welcome to today's video, which is a video dealing with one of my favorite topics, the runes. And that's my cat, Sunana, who is named after the Nordic sun goddess, and apparently she'll be joining us today. I tried to get the cats out of this video, but they will not leave it alone because they love the runes. And no wonder, because the cats are sacred to the great ancient northern goddess Freya. So thank you, Lady Freya, for your blessing. Welcome to you, though. Welcome to this time of learning more about the runes. And in today's video, what I wanted to discuss and share with you about has to do with casting the runes. Now, as I'm using that term here, casting the runes, I'm using that in a very specific way, and I'm using it in a different way than when we just simply refer to reading the runes in any way. And you know, a lot of us will use that term casting the runes or rune casting to refer to any type of rune reading. But in this sense that I'm going to be using it today, I'm really talking about actually casting the runes, as in throwing them down upon a cloth or a surface. And if you have little runes, casting actually can work better than if you have big runes, but it can still work with big runes. And the idea with casting, well, first of all, there is a belief among many modern rune practitioners and students of the sagas and the ancient Northern European tribal myths and so on. There is a belief that the runes were traditionally read by casting. In other words, throwing the rune staves down upon a surface. And there is some references in the ancient literature to support that, but we really don't know that for sure. I want to say that we really don't know that for sure. And I know there are a lot of rune purists who say that, you know, the only valid way to read the runes is to throw them down and cast. I want you to know I don't believe that way. I read the runes in the more modern way as well, which is simply by drawing. And I bet a lot of you watching this video who do actually read runes or will get into it will do that. And you know, you focus on your question, you get quiet inside, you do your invocations if you read in that way as I do. And then you perhaps pull out one rune. And here I have Othala, Othel. So you could pull out that one rune, or you could pull out 3, 5, or 7. I mean, you could also pull out 2 or 6, but there's a certain designated amount that we pull out. And I do believe that this method works well for a lot of us modern people, because many of us who come to the runes may have already had experience with reading, say, oracle cards or tarot cards. So then we transfer that experience onto our rune reading. But the cards are different than the runes. I mean, you really can't cast the cards. Well, you could, but I think you get more of a jumbled mess. But you can cast the runes. So anyway, I think the reason we draw like we do is because of the influence, the modern influence of working with the tarot cards. It's likely that the runes are older than the tarot. And in fact, some scholars do believe that the tarot evolved out of the runes. Again, we don't really know that factually. That is a theory among some, what would you say, academics, so some researchers. But the runes are a different system, and I do believe from working with them, it's clear that, to me at least, that sometimes they want to be cast. And what I like about the casting versus the drawing is that it allows for more magic to happen in the reading. When we are drawing a certain designated amount, when we say I'm going to draw 3 runes, and one's going to represent past, present, and future, let's say. That's a common reading. Or one's going to represent the situation right now, and then the middle rune's going to represent the obstacle before me, or what it is you need to do. And then if you conquer that, the last rune represents the outcome. Have you heard of a spread like that? Probably. Okay. Probably if you've done any rune spreads before. And if you haven't, don't worry about it. This video will be very helpful to help you get educated as you grow in your rune abilities. So, that's a way of doing it, for example. But the problem with that, with trying to read runes in the same way we read cards, and keep in mind I do it, so I'm not totally biased. I do it sometimes, and then sometimes I cast. But the problem I come into when I do that is the runes, they are elemental powers. They are forces of nature themselves. And so they don't always work well in those confinements. I find even though I'm saying and I'm setting the intention sometimes that this will be this, this, and that, a lot of times it isn't this, this, and that. As I get into the reading, either for myself or for another person, I can see that, for example, in that spread, I just gave you that example of past, present, future, or current situation, the obstacle, what the outcome might be. A lot of times, I will see in what is supposed to be the outcome position what I'm actually dealing with right now, or what the client is actually dealing with, or something else, okay? So, rune reading isn't always that linear, is what I'm saying. And we might want to try to work in a non-linear method too. And that is what casting is. It is much more intuitive and non-linear than the drawing method, okay? And keep in mind, some people use the phrase rune-casting to mean any form of rune reading. And I might even do that if I was in an intro class teaching so as not to confuse the students. But here, we're moving up into more of the intermediate, I guess. And we're using rune-casting to mean casting, throwing them down. So I'm going to demonstrate this in a second, and maybe in a couple of different ways. But just so you know, this method is not as neat. It is not as organized. It is not as linear. For those of you who, like me, come from a background where you are empathic, or you are intuitive, or you are naturally psychic, I think that you will probably really enjoy this method because it will free you up and free the runes up to speak to you in the way that they are intending to. And through your natural sensitivity, you will be able to interpret them well. Now, if you don't feel that you're particularly intuitive or empathic, if your energies run in a much more structured way, or you don't read energy, this method may be more challenging for you. I still would encourage you to try it at least a few times just to get a feel for it. I feel that every rune reader, every rune seer should work with casting the runes at some point. Now, you don't have to do this right away if you're just a beginner, but I am going to show you, and we'll start with that actually, I'm going to show you a way that is more simple of casting the runes that even beginners can use. So don't think if you're watching this, if you're a beginner, you might think, oh, this is way too far over my head. No, it won't be. Maybe the more complicated version that I may also show will be. But for the basics, you can do this too. So anyway, those of you who are more left brain, more structured, you like everything in neat little places, this method will challenge you. But that's not necessarily a bad thing because we need to be stretched and grow, right? We don't want to just stay static. And isn't that what the path of the runes, I feel at least, is all about? It's a spiritual path of growth. It isn't just, doing readings, but it's interacting with these forces of nature, these primal powers that the runes represent, and in a way that will encourage us to grow and evolve. So casting could definitely represent that for you. And again, if you're more intuitive, say if you're used to doing readings without tools, which I primarily am, even though I continue to work with divination tools, then you'll feel like you're coming home, I think, with this method. Okay. So, and like with many of my videos on the runes, you might want to watch it and take notes while you're watching this. You may feel the need to do that. Or you may want to watch this video one time through and then take notes later. Only do that, though, if you're really good at going back. If you're not really good at going back and you want to actually be able to use this information, I would suggest pausing the video now and getting something to take notes on if you don't already have that. So I'll just give you a second for that. Maybe you're just reaching around to Notepad or something, or you can pause it if you want. I'm going to put this rune back in that I drew out earlier, and I'm hoping that you can actually see my runescape here. But if not, I will photograph it when I'm done and kind of describe it to you. And at least you can see what I'm doing. So this is one of my rune sets. And these are basically ceramic runes that have been fired in a kiln by one of my students, a gift, and she did an awesome job on them. I think they're large enough that we'll see them. I may have to move my rune cloth in. It looks like it's funny that the camera keeps slipping on me. Yeah, it does. We'll see. I don't see it on the screen, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Maybe I'll try to adjust it when we get in here. So let's get started. And with the casting, especially if you have smaller runes, and these are pretty large size runes. I mean, can you see that? You could compare them to another set that I have here, which I'm not going to be working on these, but just to sort of show you, here's my stone ones, okay? So that's 2 runes versus 2 runes. See how much larger these are. And a lot of times, if I'm going to cast all of the runes, okay, and that is probably more traditional. The belief is that the Vitki is the rune reader, the rune seer, the rune initiate, really. The Vitki, if they were to do a reading, might cast out all of their runes at once. So that would be all 24 runes or 25 runes if you have the blank rune. This set was a gift, and it was made for me, and actually it does contain the blank rune. I might make a video later on the blank rune just itself. I don't really particularly jive with the blank rune very much. I'm not anti, okay? If I buy a set that I feel drawn to, or as in this case I was gifted, handmade by a budding Vitki, a budding rune reader, so this is a very sacred set. And she did put in the blank rune, so I've opted to keep the blank rune in the set. But I want you to know that a lot of times if I'm just drawing, not casting, but drawing, I'm drawing, and I draw a blank rune, I will usually draw another rune to go with it too. Because I don't read the runes to get a blank, okay? But we'll talk more about that in another video. It's a very controversial, the blank rune, I know, and I've kind of found a happy medium ground with it. I can work with its energy. The thing about it is the blank rune is not a rune. Okay, it's a blank. So, because to be a rune, something has to be a symbol that, is a nature symbol. Basically, it came out of the forces of nature. So that's another video, so forgive me, I detoured a little. We'll do that lesson another time. But I just wanted to mention that. So your runes, you could, as you advance in this method, you would cast them down upon the plane, which would be your cloth or the floor if you're not using the cloth, or a table. And you would read them all at once. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but you have to understand, once we get into this, you'll see you're not going to be reading them all because they're not all going to come face up. So you're just casting them all. But I think what would be better to start with, and this is what I do a lot, sometimes I do cast them all out if I really want to go in deep, if I have a lot of time when I'm working with the client, or if, I'm doing for myself more of a special reading, like say it's a seasonal reading, It's a reading around the equinox or the solstices or on one of the other holy days of nature. I might cast them out, all of them, or if I just feel led, I might cast them all out. But a lot of times what I do, because that's a lot of casting, and also these runes are pretty big and heavy, and it's just kind of hard to get them all out at once. So if I'm reading with this set of runes, as opposed to one of my sets where the runes are smaller, I will do one of two things. And I'm going to start with the just simple way that is also the most non-linear with this. So instead of trying to cast them all out, I'm just going to reach in one of my hands. And I think it would be better to do your more receptive hand, but that's up to you. So a lot of times people will say that's, the opposite of the hand you write with. But I'm actually what they call biologically left-handed. I write with my right hand. I do other things with my left hand. And my instinct, my energy flows more towards my left side, even though I learned to write with my right hand. Like many people, I was kind of forced into writing with my right hand when I was younger. So my right hand actually is my more passive side because I'm biologically left-handed. So I'm going to use my right hand. But really, it probably doesn't matter that much on that. You could use both hands if you wanted to start with, but really it's one hand that you're going to reach in and grab some runes with. Did you hear me? I just said some runes. I didn't say 6 runes or 16 runes. To really be flowing with the energies, I just want you to reach in and grab some runes. You could think of it as grabbing a handful, but not necessarily. Just grab some runes, more than one, okay? And I have them here, and now I'm just going to cast them down. Now, I don't know if you can see this or not, and just in case it's not visible on the screen, I will definitely go back and take a photo and put it in. But what I have here are some of my runes. Well, first of all, what I have here is I've cast 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I didn't count those out. Okay, that's just totally random. It could have been 9. It could have been 10. It probably can't be 24 with this bag of this runes because they're too big, right? So I'm limited by how many I could get in my hand. But, it happens to be 8. It could have been more. It could have been less, okay? And so that's what we're going to work with here to start with. Now, in this method, and this is where having a cloth is good, and traditional is a light-colored cloth, but as you'll see when I photograph it later, I'm using a tie-dye cloth with this particular set that has a lot of different colors, but it has red and blue and yellow and green. And I wanted to use that with this rune set because the way that my student Vidke made these for me is each of the 3 rows is stained and colored a little differently. So I feel that goes very well with this rune set. Does that make sense? That's kind of getting into little details. Don't worry about that. Just have a cloth. I mean, heck, if you don't have a cloth and you want to use a little hand towel, as long as it's clean, that's fine. But in this case, the cloth serves not only a ceremonial purpose, but a way of defining the reading, because even though this is very intuitive and very loose, you're going to need some way to define what you're looking at. So if you don't have a cloth, then you have to mentally set the parameters of how far out. You have to have boundaries of what is considered the plane that you're reading on. Does that make sense? If the rune goes because I have a cloth, it's real easy, but even if I didn't, if the rune goes all the way out over there, because I throw it down and it goes I'm not going to count that one, okay? So that's where I'm getting at is only the runes that fall on the plane count, or in this case, the cloth. So I have here 4 of the 8 have fallen outside of the plane, and they've actually fallen closer to me than the ones on the cloth. But I'm not going to count those in this reading because they are outside of the designated plane. So there is a little bit of the linear designation with this. Now, you could say, and maybe we'll do it, I could say, I'm going to go ahead and count these ones, at least if they're upright, because they are close to me. We could do that. I'll leave you to decide that, but I think it's, to me at least, it's very intuitive and very obvious that if I cast them out and they go that way, away from me, outside of the cloth and away from me, I'm not going to count this, okay? Maybe these ones that have fallen back towards me, because I'm, at this instance, not necessarily reading for anybody else. Maybe those do relate even closer to me. So do you see how this method is a little bit more looser, and there's a lot of variables you have to figure out. And I'm not sure on that right now, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure. So I'm going to leave. Here's what we're going to do. And if you want to follow along and get your runes out and get your cloth out, now you know it's easier with the cloth, right? Do that. But what I'm going to do here with this reading, I will pause this and take a photo to be sure that we have, a clear image of it. And then we'll proceed on. But what we're going to be looking at, just so you understand, what we're actually going to read, usually it's going to be the ones that have fallen onto the cloth, but here I'm going to leave the ones that have fallen off the cloth but close to me because they're so close. And there's no variable here, okay, this next part I'm about to tell you. The ones we're going to read are only the ones that have landed face up. So, if we can't see anything on the face, after I take my photo, that's just for you to make sure you understand the method, then we're going to remove all the ones that did not land face up. And this is true whether you do 24, the entire Futhark down on this cloth, or you do 3, or you do 8, or you do 16. Only the runes that are face up are the ones that you're going to read. Only those are the ones that have meaning for the reading. And that's true even if you want to count the ones that went a little off the cloth, okay? Because the ones that have laid face down, I mean, they're just not relevant enough to be showing you their face yet. Or actually, it's not that they're not relevant, but they're not part of the energy of what's trying to come through. They could be relevant in some way. And I have seen, sometimes I take a peek at, well, what are the runes that came out that are face down? And a lot of times I've noticed, especially when I'm reading for somebody else and dialoguing, that what we see are runes that represent past situations that they've recently been through. So we don't necessarily want to spend any time or much on those runes that are face down. So if you have cast your own reading, just know that if you're following along. And actually, if you're following along, if you happen to be going back and watching this video again and you're trying to work along with me and cast, your handful of runes out, and let's say you have cast your runes and you do have them laying out there, before you remove the ones that aren't, part of it because they're face down, I would encourage you to take a photo if you have a device to do that, or just sketch them out in your little rune journal. I do that sometimes, so I just sketch them out. So sketch them out of what it looks like with all that has fallen, Now, if you have 24, that's harder to do, but I have done that. Of course, if you're photographing, it's easy. So do that now. Get a photo of your original throw. This is just to help you learn this method. And then in a second, we're going to, in the demo reading here, we're going to remove the ones that are face down, but without moving at all the ones that are face up. So listen, if you've got a really organized linear brain and you're like, okay, I'm going to remove all these ones that are face down, your brain might naturally take you to the place that you're going to try to pick up the ones that are face up and put them in an order. Do not do that. Do not move the runes that are face up. You understand? Because if you do, you'll just mess it all up. Okay, so take a moment to do what you need to do, and I'm going to take a moment to photograph this first sequence, this first step in the rune casting for you.